All right, guys, let's take a crack at it. I want to share with you guys some stuff that I do at the drawing table. I want to share a little bit of the process of my daily warm-up stuff so that I get my hand and my brain coordinating before I get started actually trying to do an intense practice of finishing a piece, putting all that mental pressure on ourselves to get something looking really good, like an old masterwork or something. I want to share with you guys what I do to get moving and in the momentum of just designing something. I wanted to show some of the cheats that I use, the physical cheats that I use to reference in some of my little setup over here, because I think for me, having like no frame of reference for any of this stuff, it was like being in the middle of nowhere, just trying to figure out like, okay, so I'm supposed to be good at drawing right away, right? And I'm supposed to know everything about how to set up an area that's going to have all the stuff that I need immediately to solve the problems that I'm going to run into when designing something. Side note, you have to have a really cool mug with some nice fresh liquid in it when you're practicing. Don't forget to eat and drink. So what I do to get started is usually I'll start with just basic line work, then I'll do shape work, then I'll do forms. So I like to think about that in terms of creating dimension with stuff. Let's jump in and actually do something. I'm using this really old newsprint paper that I have. This is not my favorite newsprint paper, but I'm just going to use it to get my hand moving and my arm moving, and I want to draw like some nice, decent strokes. I think the process of doing this is not only good for just getting started with moving your arm, but training your arm to make nice looking gestural, flowy strokes on a large sheet of paper. I think it's really important to be able to just move a lot, like Tai Chi like movement when you're doing stuff, because if you're not feeling the whole gesture of what you're doing, it's probably gonna look a little bit stiff. And if you're only used to working with thumbnail size stuff like this, you're probably not gonna be able to cross the threshold of a page and make it feel like the whole form is wrapping around in terms of the design line. So I like to get started with stuff like this. Even if I honestly kill a whole page of this, I don't really care, because this stuff is not super expensive. And this is old stuff too. I really don't like the texture of this paper as a side. I really like the smooth texture. Shout out to Chris Legaspi for telling me about having a smooth newsprint versus a rough surface newsprint, because I'm not a huge fan of the texture that this leaves behind when I smudge this out. Maybe you like that, maybe you don't like that. It's completely individualized what we make with our art and how we want it to look. Maybe you want it to look a little bit rougher. That's totally cool. I just like the smooth look, at least for my drawing stuff. So the little thing that I start to do, I'm using a Carb Othello, and I also happen to have a few nibs left of the Wolf's Carbon, which is that greasy, more pastel-esque, I guess. Charcoal smudges a lot less, draws a lot more. See how that just doesn't move. Like once it's down, it's like not much is happening. But with this stuff, with the Carb Othello, first off, I can go pretty dark with it. With this stuff, that's about as dark as I can get with that, and it's not really going anywhere. With the Carb Othello though, this stuff can smudge really, really easy, and I can, if I want to create that texture on this rough surface, it's there. With this, I'm not. I'd have to pull this to this. So even just in terms of already creating some complexity of what we're doing with our design work, I can use this for fine lines that are not moving anywhere. Once I get the structure of something, say this box, once I know where this box is going in space, I can lock that in place, and I know that that line work is not going very far. And then I can go and shade this in and smudge that around. and I can already create gradients on that. But see, this is super blurry, or that's super sharp. So which one do I want? Now, if we want to add some complexity already, we can go right to this stuff that I got from Steve Houston, the Alpha Color. This stuff is amazing. So this is going to make your hands totally black over time, but basically, like, you can lay down a big area of this stuff and then blur it like this. It can go pretty dark. It's going to smudge all the way into all the pores of that paper, so it's going to go like really dark. So if I know that this is going to be pure shadow and I want to keep it pure shadow, I can just smudge that right in there, and then it turns into super black. So again, like under here, look at that, super black, right? So already we're starting to play with, we got 3 different things. We got like a pencil-like thing. We got like a fine liner. Well, no, we got like a mid-tone, what would you say? Like an ink wash of a gray sort of thing. And then we have like a super black, non-fine liner type of thing in terms of like inking, thinking about it in terms of inks instead of value-based system. So already we're starting to like play with forms and shapes, and I think that's like one of the most important things that we can do when we get started, is just allowing the hand to move, to do good line work, to do some decent line work in terms of 3 different types of lines. I know you've probably heard this before. S lines, where they're going back and forth and back and forth, and obviously that can go either way, so you can do back and forth, but it's a curvy line, right? It's a figure 8 sort of thing, right? Or a figure 8 that's open-ended. And then you have a C type line, which a C that's completely closed off is going to make an O. And then you have straight lines, and straight lines can run parallel to each other, or they can cross, right? And that's gonna, these lines are gonna represent stuff, right? They're gonna represent the edge of things, or they're gonna represent maybe a gradation, right? You're gonna go from further spaced to tighter spaced. Maybe that represents a drop in shadows, or maybe that represents how far away something is. And you're making like a horizon line. I'm gonna make a terrible horizon line, sorry. There we go. All right, sun setting in the background. And now you have some foreground type idea like that, right? So you're creating like space, the illusion of depth, depth perception on a 2-dimensional surface, because you're spacing and getting tighter with the line work. But all those lines have to run fairly parallel to each other unless you're doing organic shapes, right? And if you throw organic shapes, it's going to disrupt that progression into the horizon. So the lines that you're getting started with are going to represent everything that you're doing on the page, and then you're going to choose if you want to keep them in or take them out. If you want to take stuff out, what I'm using to take stuff out is gummy eraser, and I just like to stick it on the back of this because this is on an angle, and if I want to hold this right here, I can just put it there and I can take it off, and I can also knead it into a particular shape like this. If I want to get really particular with taking some of this edge off, I can get really particular with taking that edge off and making it a lot sharper. Oop, I have some excess charcoal on it right there. But now I can go in and do a removal based process. Like, see this mid-tone? I can remove some of that mid-tone. Now I can put it back. Now I can remove it. Obviously there's only so many times that the paper itself can handle that process. But we're starting to get into the back and forth nature of, I designed this, I over-designed it, I gotta pull it back now, and now I gotta push it forward, pull it back, push it forward, pull it back. I think generally speaking, what we're doing when we work linearly is we're locking down an area really quick. So if I put too hard of a line in there and it wasn't a great line, and now I feel like I'm kind of stuck to that design of that shape, oh, but I don't like, you know, the way that I didn't do this line very well, and now I got to make up for it. A problem that I always ran into, especially as a kid when I first started doing this stuff, was I would put too hard of a line down too quick. So you want to keep your lines light and fluid as long as possible. That's why I think it's really good to just practice for even just 10 minutes. Sacrifice a page to just doing line and tone study with like basic forms. That's why I do this stuff. Just basic forms, an egg, a sphere, whatever you want to call it, doesn't really matter. But the point is, you're practicing something that's pretty round. So you got your C, you got your S, and you got your I. You're gonna practice something that's round. You're probably starting with an egg or a spherical type shape. And then in your mind, when you go from line to form, you're gonna want to form a shadow on it. So you're gonna have to pretend in your mind that there's a light source coming from somewhere. You can pick where your light source is coming from and what angle. Let's say this light source is behind the egg. That's gonna pull light like that. So the light is coming from way downtown over there, and it's gonna cast a shadow like that. If the light source is coming from here down on it, it's going to pull a shadow more like this, right? So now we're starting to go from two-dimensional design of just line work into three-dimensional design. I like to think of three-dimensional design in terms of looking down my paper in three different ways. This is the simplest way that I've come up with understanding this and remembering to do this. So three-dimensional design, 3D design. We're gonna go down the form. We're gonna look around the form. And then we're gonna go over the form, usually represented by the separation of light and shadow. So the major path that your eye is gonna go across is gonna be the hard line that separates that light and shadow. That can be soft and dark, or it can be really hard and dark, depending on what style you're doing it in. But if you have line to represent the outside of a form, outside, being careful of the terminology, you have a line, let's say a thick to thin line, and where I cut off that thinness of that line is representing right where the hottest point of the sun is hitting this, because it disappeared, because there's nothing there to represent, because the light is taking over, and this is shadow. If that thick to thin is representing the top, I've designed up to that point. We're gonna subconsciously understand that light is hitting that point, and now underneath on the other side is gonna be dark. It's gonna be opposite to that. So we're going around the form, we're going down, top, down. Hottest point is here on a little angle, because it's more interesting than straight down, right? On a little angle, and now we're designing down the form. Did I complete my value structure? Down the form. Let's see if I can do this. I'll do it with just these. And just group all my shadows together for now. Mid-tone. And then, did it cast the light? Is it sitting on the ground? Okay, so now I'll just draw my cast shadow. That's roughly the, let's say, the angle of that. So I designed down the form, I designed around the form, and now I can design over the form and reinforce the dark, the depth of that shadow, like that. It's just a start. It is not perfect, and I don't have an actual egg that's actually lit to represent it, but that's the start of the idea of getting the hand moving and doing a basic thing like forming an egg. You can go with any fruits and vegetables, still life things that you want, and you can do it from memory, or you can do it from actual reference, which was probably the best way to do it at first, is from actual reference, right? And then do you want to design a background around this thing that's not going to interfere with the actual object itself? You want to play with the mid-tone and the highlight area on that, play with the edge like that. So hopefully that gets some of the idea across. Now, what forms can we do? Some of the basic forms that I am constantly doing is this pumpkin. So I'll do like an edge on top, an overlapping form on an overlapping form on an overlapping form, which is really why I'm doing it, because I want to show overlap. And it's a, what's the word for this? I don't know. These edges, like these repetition of the same form, right? I think of this like a deltoid, like a shoulder. Like that's how I would want to represent a deltoid that's really separated. Is it serrated? Sure. So yeah, so I'm gonna go through and I'm just gonna play with drawing the same thing that I normally draw, a little pumpkin shape. And then I'll go through and play with how I render it, because I already know the form. I've done it a gazillion times at this point. So I'm gonna play with, well, maybe I'm gonna do it this way today. Maybe I'll dig in to that part today. And a lot of this is done for me from memory, because I want to know that I can just draw some stuff with no frame of reference other than my memory. Because if I have to literally pull out everything from reference, then I feel very limited in my design and feel like I'm locked down in terms of what I can design. So at least I have some idea of what it looks like without like losing the reference. Like I don't have to do exactly what I see in front of me. That's the reason for doing it from memory. That being said, you know, you want to check your work, right? You want to make sure that you're not bonkers for the way that you're representing something. So you got to go check, like, what does an actual pumpkin look like if I pull one up and light it? And now I'm getting moving in my head a little bit more, and I actually can draw something that looks somewhat more interesting than just a sphere, some watermelon thing with terribly valued lighting on it. Right? It is difficult to talk and draw, I gotta say. Hope to get better at this over time. So yeah, designing around the form. I like to think of the outsides as completion. So line to me can represent either pointing a direction or stopping. So it's either telling me to go from here to there with the eye, or it's stopping my eye. Like if I put up a hard wall like this makes me feel, or we use these words, feel, interchangeably. It looks like there's stoppage here. It looks like there's something like perfectly upright, halting in position, right? It's not leaning. It's perfectly, is it a tree? We don't know. But it's something that's standing upright and is not moving. So that's what it's representing in our minds, subconsciously and maybe consciously if we actually take the time to look at it and wonder what it is. So, you know, the line is either arrowing or halting, right? If it's perfectly vertical, it's like halting in nature, I think. What do you guys think? Tell me your thoughts on this stuff. So I like to do the pumpkin. I also like to do, again, this big drawing stuff because my whole arm is moving. Like if I pivot like this, kind of, I don't know, what's the term for doing that, for pivoting around a point. I'm getting this nice arc, right? That was supposedly the reason why Da Vinci could draw like a perfect circle. I think he did it with his whole arm or something. Like he did it around his shoulder, like on a wall or something. But the idea is like, you're getting this good motion, this nice clean cut motion from side to side on the 18 by 24, in this case, page, or if you're doing huge wall murals or whatever, or even if you're working like super small, you can get probably a much straighter line by throwing from your elbow, you know, if you're doing like a thumbnail size thing. Another thing is when you're throwing the line and you throw it, you like pick it up off the page and come back down. So I'm going towards the page, coming up, towards the page, coming up, instead of boom, 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 back and forth. Because the back end is probably not going to work like the front, right? If you pull back and you were trying to design a nice straight line, you want it to look mechanical in nature, where it's like it's the same line over and over again. If you want it to look graphic in nature, you probably just want to repeat the same pattern from one side to the other, left to right or right to left if you're going horizontal. Or I like to do 45-degree angle lines a lot in my design work. So I'll pull down from what would be the potential light source, or I'll pull up towards the light source. So if there's a sun up here, I can represent shadow going up like this towards the light source, like that. Or I can pull, I can circle, I'm circling, I'm making a circle, and I'm touching down like an airplane. I'm touching down, touching down, touching down, touching down, touching down, touching down, touching down. And I'm doing it terribly because I'm talking about it while I'm doing it, but I can make like a certain type of line with that by doing the same motion over and over and over again. It's kind of like weaving a line, right? But you probably want to have control over how you're gesturing that line. Maybe you do want to do a zigzag. Maybe you want to zigzag your way into the shadow to show that there's like a lightning bolt type energy, right, in what you're doing. Or maybe it's something's trailing off, trailing off, trailing off, trailing off, right? This goes into concepts of abstractionism, I guess. So, you know, not something, I just got done doing so much like representative figure work that I'm not thinking abstractly as much. But in terms of doing this, like these weaving patterns represent the things that you're trying to show. So you probably want to start with some of the opposite of what you're used to practicing is probably somewhere along the lines of you know, to create some contrast in the way that you're thinking. That's somewhere along the lines of where you want to start. So it takes some of the edge off of doing what you know you want to be doing and what you want to be doing to a certain level of proficiency. If you just do something that's kind of whatever, you're just playing around like a kid would, and you're figuring it out and seeing it maybe with some fresh eyes in a way that you've not done this before. Like how are you gonna draw a ball that's squished down, you know? Take some of the mundane and try to like draw it from memory, you know, like a chair or a box or a whatever. And one of my favorite drills to do with this is turning a cube in space. So I'll show, you know, one face of the cube like this, and then I'll turn this to diamond shape, and instead of the bottom edge being here like these two, maybe I'll put it so that it turned and it fell, or it looks like it's falling, right? Because it has those lines pointing. Maybe it's this way, right? And now I'll go in and I'll just start to solidify where that's located in space. By representing, okay, light's coming from here. This is still up light, so maybe it's harder, but this is no light, so it's darker. And it's helping me sharpen my pencil, and then I will shave off part of my pencil. My little thing right here, I'll shave off the edge so that I can expose more of what I'm going to use on the page. How exciting, watching me sharpen a pencil. All right, but there we go. So I just razor bladed enough to expose, creating some edges on it. So now I have more of that exposed. I want to kind of shave this down to create a little bit of a point in case I do want to get in there finely, but usually not with this one, honestly. I wouldn't usually use this pretty finely. This is kind of like broad strokes stuff, super light and broad strokes with this one. This is my finer line charcoal thing, if I'm gonna do that. Very rare with charcoal that I'm gonna have like a super fine line, but anyway, if I do want to do that, it's there. Interchangeable, right? What else? Pumpkins. I think one of the coolest things that I learned from Steve was this little zigzag design of the shadow. So if you take like, if you squish, you know, a ball on top of another squished ball, on top of even just a third squished ball, we have this concept of threes starting already. And again, 2 might be, but 3 is a pattern. So in our heads, when we go to 3, it's suddenly super complicated. And then it can become infinitely complicated. So what I'm doing is I'm squishing a ball, I'm pretending light source is coming from this way, and then I'm gonna design down the form so that I got a cool path to get into the shadow. It's not just a straight path of underlight, underlight, underlight. It's hitting on an angle because I turned in my head the sun or light source, whatever, on its side. So because I turned it on its side, it can show dimension a little bit differently because of that. I'm just gonna erase out some of this right here. Boom, right there, right there, right there. Now we can blend all that into the same shadow, and I can come back on this edge. And then right here, boom, done. And then we can start to take how that shadow blends into the shadow, the depth of this after reinforcing it, and grouping all of the shadow shape into one area right here. After we've grouped all of that, now we can blend that, blend this, and blend this. And that's gonna just slightly take us into the shadow side gently instead of super harsh. So on this side of things, we can contrast the light side with a mid-tone background. On this side, this is way darker, so that it doesn't conflict with the background unless we want to lose it into the background. Maybe we want to do that. We can play back and forth with that. But this is the basic idea. You have the organization principles on a very, very simple form, because all you're trying to get out of this practice right now for the first 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever, however long you want for the day, you're just trying to get used to the material. When you're used to the material that you're drawing on and you're used to the material that's in your hand, you're gonna be able to kung fu your way there to the end of the art piece a lot quicker than if you don't have familiarity with the material. So like, for example, the first time I used ballpoint pen and gunk went everywhere, it was very distracting that I couldn't control the flow of the ink. And you don't want to have that with something like this. It breaks, it chips, because you're pressing so hard that, you know, you dig into the page and the chip just flies off. And then you might have to learn that. Maybe you reinforce your stroke like this, where you're not putting pressure on the tip itself. You're kind of using like the broad stroke of your finger. But yeah, I think that's pretty much the gist of what I wanted to go over with all this basic stuff. I hope this helps some of you guys out there. Let me know. Let me comment, like, whatever. Say some ways that you like to get warmed up. That'd be cool. All right, later guys.